Welcome to Veterans Never Stop Serving. Today, we're honored to have Sergeant HT Tran, HT we call him, United States Army 10th Mountain Division, Anvil Company, retired, as our guest speaker. HT, your story is as inspiring as all the stories of the Sentinels are. I was privileged to be one of your mentors, one of the many. My fellow board member, Marty Kaplan, and I met you first at Walter Reed when you were still recovering from your wounds, and we were very impressed with your drive and motivation. Later, we flew you out to Sunnyvale, California to interview with Northrop Grumman, and they basically hired you on the spot pending your medical retirement. HT now lives in Austin, Texas with his beautiful wife and 2 children, and is working for Clark Construction as a development manager.
Turner Construction.
Turner Construction. With all that said, HT, kind of bring us up to speed on your story, your service, your transition, some of the great things that you're doing today, and maybe some of the funny things that you experienced with your fellow soldiers in the Army. And, I like to kind of turn it over to you at this point and let you talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Well, thank you for having me on today. And it's always a pleasure and an honor to do something for the Sentinel Freedom, because I feel like Sentinel Freedom, has helped me a lot. Actually, it's kind of the jumpstart to my career and my life, especially when you're laying in that hospital bed and you're trying to figure out what's the purpose of, what do you have to do next? And you have to sit and for months on end, especially at Walter Reed, to have all this time to think about it. It's a very scary part of your life when you're trying to transition, right? And Sentinel Freedom was always there, especially through our long interview process, and at some point we did come eye to eye on where my future was, and I totally appreciate it. But those long, hard conversations was things that what I feel most proud about, to set those foundation blocks, especially with you and Mr. Kaplan on, I had some unrealistic ideas of coming back from a combat injury and wanting to go back and, and go test for a police department. But that wasn't really, that was more of an infatuation than it was realistically where I wanted to be. And I was glad to have that support.
I remember, HT, when we first sat down in the conference room at Walter Reed, you were a pretty angry guy. You wanted to get the hell out of there and fast, and it just wasn't moving as fast as you wanted. But you channeled that energy, that anger, if you will, into a positive outcome. But I remember that day vividly. And of course, we've had many meetings there. Thank God.
100%. And I always like to say, it started off rocky, but it was definitely a well-intentional conversation that needed to have, because being at Walter Reed, and I don't mean to insult anybody or offend anybody, but that hospital felt like a prison to me. Being from someone who was very active on deployment, in an infantry corps, we were always doing something, order, and it was really a lot of rigidity, and on top of my OCD as well too. It wasn't a place that I wanted to be at. I think for my mental health, I felt like I was being imprisoned. And you're right. I saw the Sentinel Freedom as a door opener for me to open up the gates, so I can run. But running without no plan is obviously running into disaster anyways, right? And as we were having these conversations, and we were where you had to chain me down to kind of really think about things, so to say, I had to sit back and really plan out what is the purpose. And I think I use the word purpose a lot. And when you get to this point, and I was older too when I enlisted in the Army, right? I enlisted in 2006 after graduating from San Jose State. I truly believed I was a lifer. I gave up the idea of wife, kids, family. I really thought that my whole ambition was to be a Ranger. I wanted to be a Ranger. That's why I joined the infantry corps. And when I got injured on Mother's Day of 2008, that really put a huge obstacle in my life. And it wasn't like a hard obstacle. It was a invisible obstacle, a mind block, so to say, for where I was heading. And I think a lot of that too, on a mental health state, it made me depressed. It made me angry. I mean, you used the word anger. I think I was very enraged,
Yeah.
that, hey, how did this happen to me? You know, I saw other people transitioning and I just didn't know how to get there. The great part about the Sentinel Freedom wasn't just, you weren't just focused on like, what I was going to do afterwards. It was like, hey, let's plan for the future. I couldn't see the future. That was the biggest problem. Why I was so angry, I couldn't see a future, and I didn't understand that. And along with you, Mr. Kaplan, and a few other mentors, I was towards the end of that 15-month sentencing, is what I called it. I think then I started to see the light a little bit more, right? Like kind of like, hey, one day at a time. It's not that easy trying to understand everyone used to tell us in the hospital while we're in that bed, just take it day by day. What does that look like? How does that feel? How does that, you know, how do I not feel like that day by day? And for, every day felt like a transition. I think on a sense, I'm not one to be good with change. And I think that was the biggest struggle, right? And so luckily by having, the Sentinel Freedom helped me plan that through, right? And not only that, but it was such an easy effort once I was committed to understanding what that purpose was. I mean, I came home, you helped me find an apartment, you furnished my apartment, you got me a vehicle to drive in to get to where I was. And then not only that, but right before, and I currently still this day am helping veterans, especially in my network, think about, even if they're not in the Sentinel Freedom, to think like the Sentinel Freedom, how you guys built that process for me,
Mhm.
right? Because I'm like, don't wait until the end right before you leave the military to start thinking about transition. If you're thinking about transitioning today and it's like 2-3 years apart, you need to start that process now. And part of that, I think, one of the things I think now that I've 13 years graduated from the program and really had all this business experience too, is thinking about it too, was the Army never really trained me to network.
That's right.
You're trained to be mission oriented, trained to be in the moment. You're trained to think like, hey, how do I react in this particular moment? But to plan for the future, to plan to transition, that's not something we talked about. And then not only that, but if you do get to that point, it's only 90 days. And 90 days is not enough to plan for a transition, right? And kind of understand that other aspect of adjusting, acclimating back to the civilian life, right? And I think you and I had a conversation, I think first year back, where I just didn't understand why things weren't moving. Once again, for me, it was like, why wasn't these decisions made faster? Why are people reacting this way that it is? Because we're so used to be like, hey, I need some, get on the radio, I need this now. Most of the time you get it. And we're so used to in the Army, rush to get everywhere and then we'll sit around and wait. You can only take so much weight before you're like, I need to make a decision now. And as an infantry sergeant, you're trained to make the decision on the spot so you can survive. And civilian life is sort of like surviving, right? I mean, kind of understand it's really acclimating back to be a part with the people. And I think I always drew that line, right? That anger. I'm like, hey, I'm in uniform now. I go back here. Who do I become? Who am I now? That took, honestly, that took almost a decade to kind of figure out, right?
Yeah,
And then
the Army is kind of wised up to the transition thing. They're trying a lot of things. For instance, my oldest son is a major now in the Army, is going through getting ready to retire. He'll medically retire also, but the Army allows him to do a 1-year paid internship his last year in service.
I love
Which,
that idea.
yeah, it's very smart. Now, not everybody takes advantage of that. And of course, for you guys sitting around Walter Reed, your transition was compounded by your injuries. And so the hurdles are much higher for you guys and gals,
Yeah.
transitioning out with injuries. What Marty and I and General Lowe, Ron Lowe, when we first sat down and came up with this concept, we said, what can we do? Well, we're business people. We're not psychologists. We're not counselors. But what we do know is a lot of people in different industries across the nation and let's plug in our network. But you're right. It's that network that's so important. The sooner you start building it, but you're kind of locked in when you're in the Army, you're on an Army base, you may be miles away from where you're going home to. And so finding those mentors in that community is what we always try to do, is find a couple of mentors in the community that our Sentinels are going to talk to them and introduce them to their network and help them start building that
And if
network.
you really look at it too, that's your first line of defense on just the networking, right? You're
Yep.
getting used to opening up to someone else that you don't know, but it understands where you're coming from. I think one of the things I really loved about you and Mr. Kaplan is that no one ever really made us feel sympathetic to our situation, right? Hey, this is the next level. Let's the next phase. Let's start thinking about this. It's going to be hard. You kind of have to push through it. And I always appreciated that. As much as I was very friction about it, I also appreciate it in that sense. And I don't think, you know, if I'm gonna help people understand, or other veterans understand, is that, you know, you have the VA system and you have these other nonprofits that are there for your moral support. But the Sentinel Freedom is a little bit different. Like, hey, you know what? You're trained a certain way. You're trained to be effective. You're trained to move forward. This is what you got to do. And I think on that end of things, I just at some point, especially at Walter Reed, I just got tired of hearing "thank you for your service" when I'm just trying to move forward, right? Like, hey, I don't need you to entitle me. I need you to help me get where I'm at. And I really felt, I think out of the 30 nonprofit organizations, and I say this genuinely, Sentinel Freedom was always very direct, very upfront. And you know, the checklist, you know, your annual, your biannual checklist of what you're doing once you're in the program too is very helpful, because it's not like, hey, you know, there are a lot of good, great donors, a lot of supporters that are doing this. They want to see this program to be successful. Having that checklist ensures the future of our Sentinels, you know. And it wasn't like, hey, this is a free check to go do what you want to do. Like,
Yeah.
hey, this is supposed to move you along with your career and your future. And, you know, through the Sentinel Freedom, obviously, and through a few of the other mentors, you know, I started my own business. I started Anvil Builders. You
Right.
know, I was there for 8 years. And that was a very great life experience for me, you know, to be able to lead again and be a part of a team. And then, you know, due to economic situations and just politics, you know, I ended up making a decision to move my family to Austin, Texas. And part of that reason, I don't think a lot of people know or understand this, was that you get to a point where you're building this business, you're building this team with every good leadership. I mean, you see with Sentinel Freedoms all the time, is that you step away so that you can see what you built. Either will it survive or will it carry on the legacy? And I feel like when I graduated through the Sentinel Freedom, I felt like you did the same thing for me. Like, hey, it's time now. I can't hold your hand. I can't be there to walk with you anymore. Let's see how well you do. I will be here, but you know, we'll move. The legacy continues. And I feel like, you know, with so many hundreds of our Sentinel Freedoms, our Sentinels have graduated. That's the legacy that you kind of left. You know, you kind of get to see where we are, how we are, you know, where we're at with their families, our
Right.
careers. That's a huge legacy. Not only that, I think within that
Yeah.
legacy is a very huge reward of all the efforts that you have done. So, you know, I'll take this time to thank you for that as well too. And
The thing we always tell our donors that this really isn't a charity. This is an investment program. And so instead of saying you're a donor, we call them investors, because there's a tangible return on our efforts with each Sentinel. And that return is that Sentinel becoming successful in education, in career, and, you know, personal life. But we really do believe that obviously it's a great investment, and the return is also what you guys do after service in your communities. You know, coach baseball, little league, soccer, you're involved in your schools, you're always involved in some form of helping others out. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about this program. Also, we stay in touch. I would like to, just for full disclosure, let everybody know that HT has been on our board of directors for several years. And what he brings to our board of directors is the experience. None of us on the board have been wounded. We have 2 wounded veterans, you and Jason Church, on the board. And you guys give us a lot of perspective from the point of been there, done that. I was one of these guys, one of these wounded veterans. And so that's just invaluable to us in our discussions about where we're going and what we're doing. And should we add this to the program? Should we take this out of the program? And effectively, HT is one of my bosses on the board of director.
Not necessarily.
So we have a lot of fun, and gosh, I got so many memories of you. And when you first started at Northrop Grumman, it was kind of like, oh my God, this is massive,
Yeah.
And you fought through it, and then you started your own company and sold that. You were recognized as one of the leading young contractors in the United States. In a ceremony back east somewhere. So, with all of that, of course, we get to share kind of in a lot of pride in what our Sentinels accomplish and what you've accomplished in your life, and great family, and just amazing stuff. So the stories are continuous as we add.
And that's actually, one of my favorite reason why I'm still very involved with Sentinel Freedom is that it is a pay it forward. And I see a lot of our Sentinels doing the same thing, is a pay it forward mentality. I mean, obviously what you endured with your sons, when they were injured, and then you stood up to the community and you wanted to pay it forward. I think, every decision that Sentinel Freedom makes and every graduate that we get across that line has that same sense of like responsibility, like, hey, we got to pay this forward. As a board member, I'll tell you, one of the things that I mostly enjoy is being able to keep in touch with some of our new Sentinels, give them perspective, right? Perspective matters. I mean, whether you share a lot or a bit of your story, you never really know what struggle that Sentinel is going through. By sharing that, you get kind of pushing through, if they're to the next obstacle or to the next level that they need, and you're there for support. And the great part about you designing and allowing, Jason and I to be on this board is to kind of give that sense like, hey, this is more than just a board. It's more about caring and being able to relate, right? And I think that's where a lot of nonprofit misses the boat on that, is not being able to relate, and it's more mission driven on their side and not on the veteran side of things. Right. And I think the Sentinel Freedom has done a very excellent job of that. And recently, I just reached out to one of our Sentinels who's going through graduate school. I'm like, hey, I just got done. Is there anything I can help you? And then we were just checking. He's like, oh, I got like, massive homework to do, and I got all these papers. And I'm like, hey, just take a deep breath, one paper at a time. You'll get through this. But it's really about the experience, right? And it's been phenomenal to do that as a board member.
Yeah, it's one of the huge resources for our program is our graduates. So, for instance, if we have somebody that's just starting into law school, well, we've got 5 or 6 that have graduated from law school. And so we hook them together, and they can advise each other. The graduates can advise the Sentinels that's in school, what they went through, their experiences. And that's another invaluable part of it. We probably have, almost every, whether it's medicine or communications or marketing or finance, law, we've got Sentinels in those spots who have graduated and become successful. And so they pass those lessons learned to the other Sentinels. And of course, our staff, who is in charge of our program, our counselors, they look into that and say, okay, well, Jason Church graduated from law school. We got another Sentinel just starting law school, and put them together and just advise, and they become friends. The great thing about this COVID thing is we finally have started to utilize the Zoom and FaceTime and other methods of being able to talk. People were kind of uncomfortable with it when it first was out there. Not a lot of people use it. Now everybody uses it. So it saves a lot of time It's more efficient. I don't have to travel as much. And people are used to it. They're getting even more and more used to it. So it opens up a lot of new opportunities. That's one of the good things that came out of COVID. But all the thing about, we talked before about your experiences in the Army. I always ask you guys, my sons too, is tell me a funny story. Maybe one of your funniest stories that when you were serving, it could be anything, but military service isn't all, go. You're
Oh, 100%.
building, you're building relationships. You have great buddies. You laugh, and you do stupid stuff, and it's funny as hell. And I, even at our gala and our meetings, I always say that is, tell us a funny story.
Well, even to this day, even though I belong to the 10th Mountain Division, I hate the snow. I refuse to go skiing. And every year I get this text message from one of my buddies like, hey, you want to meet me in Denver for, to go skiing? And I'd be like, did you not forget that one time in the field? So, and when I joined the 10th Mountain Division, I was 26. I'm only 5'4.5", right? And then so every year upstate New York, year round, I would say 9 out of the 12 months, 3/4 of the year is nothing but snow. And so one day, we're on a field mission and we're road marching, we're doing your FTX, out in the training. And I was a weapons squad leader. So I'm carrying my stuff, but I've never walked in the snow. I lived in California, born and raised. When we say snow, it's cute because it's only like a foot of snow. And if I really wanted to see snow, I'd drive to Lake Tahoe, and you get like maybe 2-3 feet, no big deal. Upstate New York, it's like
8 feet.
100%. So I'm sitting in the barracks room. I remember looking out the window and I'm telling the guys, I'm like, hey, we were just outside for formation and now the sky is like dark gray. And so, they're having a conversation like, Tran, it's, you must be bored. You got nothing else to do. Go clean your weapon. I'm like, I'm cleaning my weapon, but I'm letting you know the sky's changing. And then I look at the window, like literally not even like a few minutes later. I'm like, hey, there's some white stuff on top of the roof. So my whole squad, because they're, one's from Ohio, the other one's from, one was actually from New York, one was from Michigan. They're all used to seeing the snow. So I'm like, there's some white stuff in the building. If someone sprays something on top of the building, they're like, are you serious, Tran? I'm like, yeah, I'm from California. And they're like, oh, the California guy. So they're like, stay here for a minute. One guy runs down the hallway, tells the guy at CQ relays it down to my squad leader down the first sergeant. So they're like, so all of a sudden now I got my whole chain of command in the hallway. They're like, hey, Tran, you don't know what that white stuff is? I'm like, no. They're like, it's called snow. I'm like, snow? We were just outside for formation, like no more than like 20 minutes ago. They're like, oh, hey, tomorrow morning, just so you know, we got a surprise for you. So I'm thinking like, oh crap, new guy to the unit, maybe I've only been here for a few months. I have a surprise. Then I'm thinking about it, I'm like, wait a minute, that surprise cannot be good. So formation, we normally get called up like around, like 5 a.m, right? We're getting ready because we have to go on our run and all that good stuff. So they wake me up at like 4 a.m. and I'm like, oh, why am I woken up? The only one woken up early. My buddy is still in bed, and I'm there. Like my team leader goes, come on, meet me out here. They're like, put on your cold weather gear and then come back out. So I put on my cold weather gear, come back out, and I see my 4th squad leader, my first sergeant, standing there and like, hey, heard you don't know what snow looks like. I'm like, yeah, but I don't look at the clock. I'm like, but it's only 04:15 in the morning. First sergeant, and he was like, don't worry, got a surprise for you. Since you've never seen snow, hands me a shovel, go outside the barracks door, literally 6 feet of snow overnight.
I know.
Open the door, and they're like, yeah, we need a walkway to the formation. I was out there all day, and I'm like, this sucks. I will never play with the snow again. That traumatized me because I'm like, I've never seen snow like that over the night. And so during that weekend, the guys would, because we're not supposed to, be like, hey, if anyone needs help with the snow, Tran will be here. I spent all day shoveling snow. I was not a happy soldier. I was like, screw that, but that was my snow story for the 10th Mountain Division.
Kurt told me a story. He said when he got to the Ranger Regiment, the drill sergeants in the what they call ranger indoctrination, would walk by him and say, Conklin, name tag, Conklin. And you got a brother here? Yeah, Chris Conklin. Okay, give me 100 push-ups, just annihilated him. And one day he gets called out of formation, and you go to the sergeant major's office, and he's thinking the whole way, like, what did I do wrong? He goes into the sergeant major's office, stands at parade rest for about 10 minutes. The guy's shuffling papers, look up at him once in a while. Kurt's going, man, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? Finally, the sergeant major looks up at him and says, Conklin, are you as screwed up as you want to be? There's only two answers, yes or no. What is it? And Kurt's thinking, oh, if I say yes, what does that mean? If I say no? And he goes, come on, Conklin, cough it up. And he's just thinking, and all of a sudden he sees out of the corner of his eye something behind the door in the sergeant major's office, and it was his older brother laughing, starting to laugh. And they had a lot of fun together, all three of them. But those stories, I mean, I talk to you guys a lot, and some of the stories are just hilarious, of the pranks you play on each other. And there's a certain amount of
the worst part about it was first sergeant would see me and he goes, hey Sunshine, how do you like the snow? And I was like, oh Jesus, first sergeant, never again. Now I know what it looks like. I didn't know it came over like that. But yeah, no, that's but moments like that honestly is what kind of carries you through the service, right? Those laughters. Because when you look at like camaraderie and like your group of friends, even to this day, you literally pick up the phone and you continue where you left off. There's no gaps where you have to rebuild that relationship again.
Remember when and remember that story, and it just opens up the conversation. And I really like the way you guys stay connected. It's important. And of course, today, again, with Zoom and everything else, and, instant communications, it's a lot easier than it was maybe when guys came back from World War II or Korea or Vietnam. So that bond is something that's, easier to continue. And I think it's important for all of us.
I just started a new role at Turner Construction, and I'm the community and citizenship, but I've only been here for a month. But slowly, for surely, I've met these other veterans that I've never served with.
Right.
And honestly, it's almost like I've already known them for forever, because we just pick them like, hey, who are you? Who'd you serve with? Where were you at? And all of a sudden you're having this connection. And now I'm just getting like emails like, what's up? What's going on, brother? Like, hey, how are you doing? Or I'll follow up with them. You build this community so fast, and knowing that is why it's so important to connect veterans with other veterans, as how the way Sentinel Freedom is doing, because you never know, just that one hello on how much grace you're putting on that person's day, just because they feel like, hey, I got someone who served, who understands. That's a support system. You just built a support system, and now they'll come to you, or you can go to them, and it's just it's almost like another day, in the service.
Well, we're very proud of you, HT, and your service to our nation, of course, and your ongoing advocating for other veterans. The example you're setting, not just in your community, but in your workplace with Turner. It's just great to see you moving, and you just keep moving forward, and that's why you're a good investment.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
But okay, so we're going to end up here. I hope everybody enjoyed today's podcast. HT and I could probably talk for a couple hours.
Yes.
We try to keep this down to half an hour. We'll return next week to hear more of our series, which we call Veterans Never Stop Serving. Please share our podcast with your network and friends. Thank you for your support to all of our donors. We call our donors investors, because there is a tangible return on their investment in those we serve, and what they will do in their community. It also, their support helps our nation meet its responsibility to these veterans who have served in our military and sacrificed much by doing so. They've certainly earned a place at our nation's table of opportunity and abundance. Until next week, this is Mike Conklin and HT signing off. Thank you.